So our last speaker of the day is Dr. Josh Rotenberg. He's a pediatric neurologist from Houston, the Houston Specialty Clinic. He has a specialty in, certifications, and he'll tell you, but in epilepsy and sleep. He's going to speak on CACNA1A and sleep. It's way more than the channel. However, in this group, he's probably most famous as being the founder and admin of our CACNA1A. It's the CAV 2.1 CACNA1A Facebook group. It currently has over 700, or I think it has, I just looked, so it has 734 members. When I joined it, there were about 45, and that was in 2018, I think. So he's also the dad of an 11-year-old daughter? 12. A 12-year-old daughter with the CACNA1A variant. So here you go.
Nice to meet you.
I know, right? You too.
Okay. How long has everybody been sitting? Forever? How about before we start talking about sleep at the end of the day and while I'm setting this up? Everyone want to get up and stretch a little bit? Stretch your legs. And I'll try, the neurologist is now going to attempt tech. Hi, everybody. I would have been here sooner. If anyone's been to Houston, you know about traffic, and don't tell people there that Houston is like New Jersey on the Gulf of Mexico because they get upset. But it has all the best parts of New Jersey. It's got most diverse city in the country. It's united. It's a hub. So I actually was born in New York and grew up in Toronto, and I lived actually here in San Antonio for 6 years, 3 of them when I was serving the Air Force and 3 in private practice. So I'll get started. It's wanting to establish communications with someone. Okay, so I was a bit intimidated. I heard that I'm being translated into 25 languages, and so I'm going to try to pepper in. It is late in the day. I'm going to try to pepper in some bad dad jokes. All right. So here we go. So yes. So thank you, Lisa. I'm board certified. Blah blah blah. Assistant professor. Blah blah blah. But this is really why I'm here. Okay. And that's when it comes. So who are you, right? Soy milk. Bien. Soy Josh. So yes, I've been to a lot of interesting places and had all kinds of interesting experiences, both in academia, on the I-95 corridor, mostly, but also in Texas. And one of the things that I learned along the way when I was doing doing service is that there are a lot of forces that would come between me and my patients that distracted from the kind of medicine I want to practice, and so that's kind of why I'm here, for better or worse. Okay, so what do I do all day? So yes, I'm board certified in brain injury, I'm board certified in epilepsy, within child neurology, but I sort of squeezed in board certification in sleep along the way. And as I often tell people, everyone sleeps and everyone could sleep better, but within sleep, my main consults are not necessarily just sleep apnea and snoring. They are going to be kids with pediatric neurologic problems and a sleep problem. Okay, and of the sleep problems, they usually come in with a chief complaint. So the kids people either say that they have problems sleeping, or their sleep is not refreshing, or they are too sleepy, which can be two sides of the same coin, and we'll get into that. And then, of course, there are things that go bump in the night. So this is kind of what I'm going to cover today. As you may know, when you're doing talks, you tell them what you're going to say. So these are kind of the things I'm going to get into. And and you can read the slide, but there are common things that we as parents, as families, encounter as far as sleep problems with our kids. There are uncommon things that we, as managing chronic illness, either in ourselves or in our kids, our families, in our case, together it's CACNA1A, There are uncommon things that we'll encounter, right? And then there are common things, and I'll get into that sort of paradox in a second. So let's all jump in. Who hasn't been there? Okay, everyone's still here. Okay, so the reason I say it's not just about the channel is because this is the difference between disease and illness, okay? So everyone has, we all have the experience of getting this, ooh, is there a laser? Okay, so everyone has the experience of getting the genetics results, right? This variant, right? So this is what originally in, I guess, 2014, Orly's was a variant. So the disease is the biology, right? That's the thing. And then there's the illness, and that's our experience of having a disease. Now, can you have a disease without illness? Okay, that's something to talk about during cocktail hour. But one of the things I'll point out about Orly's picture here, so her chin, she's had multiple cuts from falling down. So, depending on where you are, this is why I'm putting this up as the illness. So at some point we have to get scar revision, right? Because she's stopped falling so much. We had our friend, the plastic surgeon, on speed dial, and we only met him because of Orly. You probably can see by the reflection in her eyes that she still has her strabismus, which of course varies throughout the day, right? And that causes its own problems with the reading and learning and what have you. So, and we'll talk more about how this, and it's not just the experience for the person, but for the family as well. So I was digging a little bit into the Facebook response, the series. There are 125 individual responders now from the Facebook group. Ooh, sign in for guest Wi-Fi. How do I make that go away? Oh, good. So when you look at, one of the questions is what studies have you experienced, okay? And of course, so many of us have had gone through at least one, maybe multiple MRIs, EEGs, video EEG. But when you talk about a sleep study for sleep apnea, you can see how weighted, so the burnt orange is no. Okay, so I mean, besides the first two colors, the red and blue, are yes abnormal, yes normal, but for some reason this is an uncommon test for our community. And this is very relevant for us because when you ask about people's symptoms, 34% of people, of the respondents, said there was snoring, right? And that's at least the snoring, and that's the snoring in here. And 51% have restless sleep. Half of the respondents talk about restless sleep. And about a third talk about insomnia of various types. So either getting asleep or staying asleep. And some people could have both. So it's not, I don't think those categories are exclusive. But this is not an uncommon problem. Doctors love double negatives. Have you ever noticed that? Sorry. Okay. How much time do I have? I don't want to keep everyone from cocktails. Okay. Very good. So let me put this. All right. So a couple of basic things about sleep. Let me start there. Besides the fact, these are blue whales. They happen to sleep like this, which is kind of cool. But why do so many animals sleep? Well, there are a lot of ideas about it, but the problem, and this is where sleep will sort of fade in and out, is because when there's problematic sleep itself, it affects other parts, pathophysiologically, other parts of our body, frequent infections, COVID vulnerability, right? So it's sort of the 7 degree. Okay, so I'm going to challenge the translators, and I apologize for people but there's a drinking game called this, was it 7 Degrees of Kevin Bacon? Can you name a movie that connects to? Well, it's always the 2 degrees of sleep. You know, where like pretty much any pathology you talk about eventually gets to sleep as some sort of connection to it. So, in general, in people who have special needs, we're not different as a community. So the range when you look at different groups is 34 to 86%, and it's certainly more prevalent in younger children, but it still stays as a very prevalent problem even as in the adult groups. So, and it's also more complex. My new patient visits are famous for running over because this is really complex. There are all kinds of physiologic and behavioral problems that then you find in a typical population. Okay, so let me talk about a few things about sleep. I'm going to try to keep it to 2 slides. Okay, the basics of sleep. So this is something called a hypnogram, and so it's an outline of what sleep might look like in someone going through the stages of sleep. So, and it starts over at the left, right? Let's say, in this sample, so this was from someone who started to sleep at midnight. And what happens is when we go into sleep, there's an orderly process. We go into non-REM sleep of various types first, and then there's more REM sleep as the night goes on. So the REM is indicated here with it coming up to the red. And you can see those red areas, those red segments get longer and longer and longer as the night goes on. And the stage, there's actually, you can tell how old the slide is because there is no stage 4 sleep anymore. Stage 3 and 4 are now, they've gotten together. And it's all called slow wave sleep. Stage 2 is physiologically a different type of sleep than slow wave sleep. And this is also probably from an older person because there isn't too much slow wave sleep as later on in the evening, later on in the sleep period. Okay, so just have that in mind that sleep is not a thing. There's different stages of sleep. Warning, all right? Here comes, beware of the neurologist. Sorry, I know we've all been traumatized by neurologists. So here is the basic brain diagram. So when the regulators of sleep are in many different areas, and we'll come to that a little bit later. So is CACNA, right? And the brainstem has a lot of connections to very broad, robust connections with the cerebellum. Right? We'll get, and that'll come up again later. But the circadian clock is very deep in the brain and hypothalamus. But the important thing to know is that when we go into REM sleep and dreaming sleep, we're ideally paralyzed from the eyes down, well, the ears, if you're going to push with, but basically that pons level in the brainstem, we're paralyzed from the eyes down, so we don't act out our dreams. We're not supposed to. Our dogs might chase squirrels in their dreams, but our spouses would be upset at us if we did the same thing. That's it. All right, and I'll come back to that in a little bit, but that's I think the basics that we need before going forward. Okay, so let me start with sleep apnea. All right, so everyone's heard of this. And there's obstructive and there's central, but the whole field, the whole group is called sleep disordered breathing because apnea means you stop breathing, apnea, no breathing. But not everyone just stops breathing. Sometimes most of the time people wake up when they have trouble breathing. So those are called hypopneas or respiratory effort related arousals. But for the purposes of our talk today, I'm going to sort of try to keep these together as one sort of group, the obstructive sleep disorder breathing family. And we can definitely, this is another discussion about whether primary snoring means snoring without true apneas. Is that a problem? Right? So that's another cocktail party discussion. But if you take standard issue kids, about snoring, 12, 15% of kids snore. When you actually look at how many kids have sleep apnea itself, it's 2%. They're certainly higher. There are risk factors. Actually, about 100% really of adults with trisomy 21 with Down syndrome will have sleep apnea, and it is not rare, and it's certainly going to be more common in anyone who has any kind of medical complication. And what got me interested in this, and I was interested in sleep before there was a formal board certification. So this was you can tell by the year, right, 2000. So this work was done in 98, 99. So they took kids in the first grade in New Orleans schools. They found the ones who had sleep apnea, and I'll walk you through it. The control is on the far right, so those are the squares. Is there any kind of laser, or can I pull it the? I'll just so forgive me, but I'll try to walk this through descriptively as best I can. When they looked at grades, so when the first 3 bars are all the kids who have went through testing for sleep apnea. The blank box, sort of the second from the right in both groups, those are the kids who just snore. And what happened was, in the group of kids who have sleep apnea, the box that's filled in, those are the kids who got their tonsils taken out. And the box next to the right, so far left, tonsils, next box over, no tonsils. Okay, no, like they didn't have any treatment. And look at their grades. And I saw that, I was like, whoa, what is going on here? When I was doing adult neurology, all child neurologists do a year at least of adult neurology, and I saw this in the stroke wards too, in sleep, and I would ask questions, and people were like, no, don't, we don't know, don't talk about that. So this is a study that was done on MR spectroscopy of the hippocampus. So magnetic resonance spectroscopy is a way of measuring chemicals in the brain, kind of the same principles as they're using for measuring chemicals in distant exoplanets. It's a different kind of spectroscopy, but they're basically taking the data to look at what chemicals are there, what does it link about to, what does it teach us about what's going on in the brain. So NAA is a measure of neuronal integrity, how many neurons are there. And when you look at the hippocampus, you get a basic idea of like the amount of neuronal integrity. And when they looked at the kids who have sleep apnea, they noticed a big difference, a significant difference in the neuronal integrity of the hippocampus in the kids who had sleep apnea versus the controls, right? So, and that's why you see problems with learning and behavior, and so this is a common problem. We all have airways, right? Our kids with CACNA, we all have airways. And there's so many things that can influence the integrity of the airways. Right? And the thing to remember is, and I was talking before about the 3 states of being, wake, REM, and non-REM sleep. And there are different drivers in the brain for breathing. And some are more active at different times of that cycle than others. So everyone take a deep breath. If you meditate, okay? That's your cortex, that's the higher levels triggering you to breathe, right? Of course, those go off when you sleep. And what happens when we get deeper into sleep, you get into dreaming sleep. Remember I said we're paralyzed from our eyes down. So the nerves that govern the brainstem centers and the nerves that help to keep integrity in upper airways, they go offline. And so when people are deep in sleep, right? So that should make sense. That should just make sense. And so if you have problems with your upper airway, so at a certain age of life, our tonsils are larger than they'll ever be again, and that's in childhood, in comparison to the airway. So there's the upper airway. Then the other major area of variable is the upper airway low tone, right? So if our kids have low tone, sorry, whoa, hi there. If our kids have low tone, it's going to get, the tone's going to go lower. It's going to get lower when they're sleeping. And if there's a problem with the brainstem for those chemoreceptors, because when we're in REM sleep, our brain is sampling oxygen and carbon dioxide, and it's driving respiration based on what's in the blood, what it's picking up. So if there's some problem with the brainstem or problem with the chemoreceptors firing, that's going to drive people having trouble breathing in sleep. So when I hear this again and again, my child can't have sleep apnea. They had their tonsils out. Absolutely not. So in standard issue kids, 75% when you measure them a year out, will still have their sleep apnea treated a year after they get their tonsils out. Who doesn't? Yeah, I'll bet you guess, right? So, so so if you're hearing, so snoring is not normal, all right? Sweating in sleep, sleeping in different positions, trying to keep your airway sniffing position, it's not normal, okay? And so I wanted to show you the obligatory sort of sleep study. And so what I wanted to show you on this one is there are 2 red areas to look at. And on the right side, the red area has a flattened area of nasal flow above it. So that's an apnea. That's an obstructive apnea because there's no flow. But the chest and the abdomen are still moving to try to open up the airway. And after you have an apnea like that, you wake up because your body says, wake up, goofball, you got to breathe. And in adults, kids too, but you see this more in adults because we have less respiratory reserve. The oxygen saturations go down, right? It's hard to predict in kids who's going to have oxygen saturation problems, but they definitely wake up to breathe more. So you can see where in this example, the oxygen, if you look at the numbers on the second sort of row on the bottom, goes down to 87%. So I often have to tell families, look, if we gave you a free trip to San Antonio, we're going to fly you and we're going to put you in a hotel room, and it's a great hotel room, beautiful, beautiful pool, but the oxygen drops in the room 3 or 4 times an hour, but don't worry, it always goes back on. You know, you'd say, oh, no, thank you, I'll camp out outside, or you know, what have you. But that could be the hotel that everyone's sleeping in. All right, so this is an example of central apneas, and this is where the brain does not trigger a breath. And so if you look at the blue areas, you can see areas where the breathing on top of it, if you look vertically, the breathing movements stop, but so does the flow. Right, so the whole body is not, it's a central apnea. The brain's not firing to breathe. And so that's an entirely different thing. But that's important too, because you can see the oxygen dropping on that tracing as well. Okay, so what about the different treatments that are out there? So I talked about the getting tonsils out. There are many different options now as well. Orthodontics. So it turns out, and this is from the Down syndrome literature, that a palate expansion, you know, you can see the kind of thing that I have there in the slide. All right, it's a common braces thing. My kids had one. Well, it will open the airway, just 3 to 5 millimeters of expansion makes a permanent change. And we see this in the Down syndrome literature about how now, does it cure the sleep apnea? No, probably not. Does it make it more better able to be treated? Yes. And in some kids, it actually does make it. It does resolve it. There are some. I met some families last week who were doing this. They said, "My child snores, but it's okay. I stay up all night positioning them." All right. So that's the illness, right? You're doing what? They're not CACNA patients, but they're just devoted parents. And yeah, if your sleep apnea is worse on your back, then that might help, but it's not really a long-term solution. Interestingly enough, kids with sleep apnea are underweight. They have failure to thrive. You know, being overweight doesn't help, but the weight loss isn't a key criteria. And there's a new thing called Aspire. It's a hypoglossal nerve stimulator. It's a surgically implanted device for people who won't tolerate CPAP in a house, not with a mouse. And you know, we always want to avoid the option that's in the middle there, tracheostomy, because that's kind of a nightmare. Okay, now, parasomnias. Now, has everyone ever heard of the trick, and people do this as a stunt or as a gag, off, you know, summer camps and sleepovers, where you put shaving cream in someone's hand, and then you tickle their nose, right? If you're very good people, you're looking at me very puzzled. You're all very nice people, but you can trigger a parasomnia, which is an abnormal or confusional arousal by doing something like that. Okay, so we can all have parasomnias. That's what that word is. So it's an abnormal arousal from sleep. So I'm getting a little bit to the things that go bump in the night. So parasomnias cause drama, right? The parents come in and the family's haggard. My child gets up and screams like they're possessed in the middle of the night, and then they go back to sleep. And in the morning, they don't remember it. They're fine, and the parents are like drinking coffee and freaking out about it. And so the important thing is that these are pretty common in children. but they do persist into adulthood. The question isn't necessarily the sleep, the parasomnia, it's what's causing it. So, so the types of parasomnias are sleepwalking, sleep talking, night terrors, okay? Restless legs can disrupt sleep, and I'll talk about that. Even bedwetting, bruxism, eczema, right? So I can see it on EEG where eczema will disrupt sleep and cause it almost like a painful condition, okay? And you don't necessarily just have one, you can have more, and they can affect each other, okay? So bruxism is grinding, sort of the teeth-on-teeth grinding. Now, restless legs. So about 10 to 15% of the population has restless leg symptoms. So that's an urge to move the legs. Doesn't have to be the legs. That's better, that comes on once a day in the evening. So urge to move at night. Better when you move around, worse when you sit still. That's it. You know, but without neuropathy or spinal problems or other things, right? So that just being itself. And so most people just soldier on. And they just say, oh, you mean my Jimmy legs? Or, and the problem is that sometimes it can be really painful. You can get burning feeling. You can, I've heard monkeys under my muscles, soda pop under my skin. Oh, wait, here's a restless legs bad dad joke. This one's in Italian. I heard Italian was our leading language. Okay, so I translated. So it's Texas, it's Vikings, it's all here. So what happens is, for some reason, this is much more common in the descendants of Vikings and French Canadians for some reason. So of course in Houston with Louisiana right there, and the Cajuns, oh my God, if I see someone, I know what they're coming in. I just have to see someone whose name is, what's some typical French name, and I'm like, I know what this is going to be about. It's almost guaranteed. But it doesn't necessarily have to be a clear Viking ancestry. It happens in all ethnic groups. The key with this is low iron. So if iron levels start to drop, for most people who have restless legs, it can be made worse, but so can the medicines, and we'll talk about a lot of the anti-nausea medicines can exacerbate. And the idea is, why is this so popular in Vikings, was because it may have an adaptive aspect, because people kept rowing or marching in very meat-dependent environments to try to find more sources of meat. So, I'm Eric the Red. Oh, look, there's Newfoundland. Oh, I'm a Viking going down the Volga, settling the Kievan Rus, right? Well, let's keep going till we find some more meat. So that was out of Hopkins when I was there. I thought it was an interesting idea. But again, we can talk about that over cocktails. It's kind of an interesting idea. Okay, circadian rhythms. So melatonin, who has ever taken melatonin or given it to a family member? Everyone know? Yeah. So, it's getting towards the evening, so I'm spicing this up a little bit. It's the hormone of darkness, okay? And in nocturnal animals, it wakes them up. But for us, it triggers that sleep is on its way. And so as the light dims, our melatonin secretion naturally goes up. And so there are photoreceptors in the back of our eyes that aren't just for light, but they're for they receive light, but therefore helping to set our circadian clock. And they go right to the part of the brain that releases the melatonin. Right? Now that system has a lot of variation. And as I'll talk about, there's a lot of variation based on what we're doing as a society. And this is where we get to the illness. Who hasn't been up doom scrolling, looking at my darn Facebook group, or doing other things at night once the kids are asleep? Right? Who's done that, right? Who's looking at PubMed? Oh, look, there's a new publication on CACNA and preprint, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to be gaming. I'm the softie in my family, so so I put a dad up there. The sleep doctor is the softie when it comes to this. It's true. But if we're up just worrying about our kids, right? So, but what happens is light, whatever it is going to keep us awake. So, and you can think about this in other places where they want you to maintain alertness. There's always going to be bright lights. It's physiologically they do this kind of thing. But what we're doing as a society, but with computers and iPads and everything like that, is we're all subjecting ourselves to too much light after we're not supposed to. And that has its problems as well. So, and what it can do is delay your sleep phase. So it's like social jet lag. So then people have trouble getting to sleep because their brain is taking in the light and they think, oh, I'm on the beach in California. Oh, I'm in Hawaii. It's 3 a.m. right here, but I know. And so what will happen is when people come in, the parents will complain that my kid is too sleepy in the morning. They sleep all day. And the kids might complain, oh, I have insomnia. I can't get to sleep. Okay? And so this is something from an actigraph. So it's a way of looking at sleep schedules over multiple days. Think of it as a medical grade Fitbit. And the blue shows this person going to sleep later and later and later as the days go on. And it's very hard if you've been up 2 or 3 hours on Friday and Saturday to get to sleep early on Sunday because you're already on your two time zones over. You're jet lagged, right? So and then people come in, they say, my kid won't go to sleep. They don't want to go to school on Monday. They're going to sleep, right? But this is part of the illness. Okay, this is part of the illness. Oh, wait, it's also the CACNA. See, I knew I'd get, I'd get there. So, one of the things is that this is. It's just sort of one of the, when you look in gene cards about what CACNA does, all right, which systems it's involved in, the sleep regulation is one of them. Circadian rhythms is one of the the processes. Okay, and one I showed you the actigraph before. There's one study that looked at people with calcium channel abnormalities, and that's the one on the right. You're right. Yes, where you can see where they never settle. So where you see the people stop moving, that's where they're sleeping. Actually, this is a mouse study. I apologize. This is a mouse study, and it's a knockout mouse where they did this. But so it's mouse. They're not really up watching TV very much. But the important thing is that with the G proteins are second messengers. And adenosine, so caffeine is a adenosine channel inhibitor. That's why caffeine works. So, and of course, this gets more complicated because if our kids are gain of function versus loss of function, they may have different response to caffeine or staying up as far as the circadian rhythm. No one's really looked at this. I think it's an important thing to look at because it affects our experience. And I think that when we talk about restless sleep or insomnia, this may have a part of it. That might be part of the problem. But let me talk about epilepsy as an epilepsy specialist because that's, of course, common with CACNA1A. So 20% of seizures are just in sleep, all right? And we know there's no one particular epilepsy or seizure type in CACNA1A, like in a lot of other genetic conditions. But there's some that are particularly involved with sleep problems. So Lennox-Gastaut. Or even the different absence or generalized epilepsies have a major role with sleep because we can talk about the physiology of that. But of course, with Lennox-Gastaut, the kids, one of the characteristics is tonic seizures in sleep in most definitions, and so that's another reason why paying attention to sleep is important, and it's an important part of this illness. But we also have our kids with medicines, the VNS, right? So I've been putting in VNS as managing vagal nerve stimulation for my entire career. And there are settings with the VNS that can increase the risk of sleep apnea or can increase sleep apnea. So you have to kind of be aware of that if you're noting that with you or your child. This is a quick summary of what the anticonvulsants do for sleep. So, or not. And the reason I put or not is a lot of people have the opposite reaction. So, and there are a few of them that don't really affect sleep very much. Now, of course, lamotrigine can have a brightening effect on people during the day. Who's had fun with Keppra, making you or your child more agitated or awake? Right? Okay. So, it's important to ask about what the effects are of the medicines. Paradoxically, I just told you about VNS. Besides it helping with epilepsy, it can help with development, but it also can reduce daytime sleepiness. Ketogenic diet has an effect on sleep, like other anticonvulsants, but it improves slow wave sleep. Of course, ketogenic diet is difficult, but as an anti-seizure, as an anticonvulsant modality, it also affects sleep and wake. So this is from Dr. Glauser's review in 14. And I have all these references that I have on here. Oh, look, there's my, okay. Hello. How do I advance the slide here? What did I do wrong now? I'm getting beat. Ooh. I could just do that now. Okay, let's switch to the N and P. So, anyone who has an intellectual disability has a higher rate of having sleep problems, okay, and five-fold higher. And so when people are looking at you like saying, oh, it's bad parenting, or sniffing, or you're getting friend advice, you're just, the parenting books only take you really so far, right? If you have a vulnerable child, right, no, there's a lot of co-sleeping going on. And I never, ever vilify parents. You know, you don't want to do this about co-sleeping, even though the general pediatrician, as I was trained as a general pediatrician, and we were supposed to tell everyone not to co-sleep and sort of let them cry it out and gradual extinction and that kind of thing. And that's nice if it works with the family and with the child. But you know, in our world, you know, I mean, it's that people have pretty much been there and done that. Okay, and the psychiatric medicines, I didn't even talk, I talked about the anticonvulsants. I didn't even talk about the psychiatric medicines because they also have an effect on sleep. So why do I say it's not just the channel? So this is from the protein atlas about where's CACNA1A in the brain, right? So it didn't I didn't get the full full graph to the right, but you can look at this. It's a great site, but of course it's highly dense in the cerebellum. But when I talk about the physiology of sleep, CACNA1A is everywhere. It's in all the areas of the brain. So, all right. So what can we do? So I've talked about common problems. You don't forget the common things when you see people who have sleep problems, even if they're in our special family. There are uncommon problems that just affect us, and there are common problems. And you know, I thought about sleep early on with my daughter because periodically she would get possessed and be up all night and screaming, and we didn't know what it was. And she does that from time to time. Usually she goes to sleep bang at 9 or 10, but there are sometimes, given the right conditions, her circadian rhythm goes out the window, and we can be up all night singing whatever songs come up. So I think I've covered a little bit of, and we can talk about this, when should you ask for a sleep study, right? But certainly if they're snoring. Now this is American Academy of Pediatrics basic standards of care, right? There's a position statement. It's straight out there. If your child snores and has problems, you get a sleep study. ENTs sometimes feel that they have a magical way of looking at a child and saying if they have sleep apnea or not. They don't. And they certainly can't tell who's severe. There's certain kids you could tell are going to be severe, but you need a sleep study to know how bad it is, to know how far you'll come and whether you need to be in the ICU later. So what I didn't say is that kids with severe sleep apnea can have pulmonary hypertension, they can have arrhythmias. It is not a benign sort of acute condition in its most severe form. And they routinely will get worse after tonsils and adenoids come out. And it's the kids who are complex and have more than 10 apneas per hour that need the ICU for observation after they get their tonsils out. So again, so this is, and I can give you the reference. It hasn't been challenged in years, but it's basic general pediatrics knowledge. And as adults, what can we do here, okay? And I think it's important for us to try to model behavior. I mean, good luck. I'm certainly not perfect. Turning off the electronics after when you can, when the sun goes down. I think that's good for all of us and for our relationships. You want to get some breaks for yourselves, get some exercise. People who exercise sleep more, they sleep more deeply. The strategic use of caffeine. Caffeine's an interesting, highly addictive substance, you know, and that's a whole talk in itself. but it's so important to think about this and take care of yourselves, because I see this all the time where, because sleep apnea or sleep disorders has a toxic effect on adult brains. So and I knew this, I learned this when I was in the military. The military knows from studies at Rare that if you sleep deprive people for 6 hours or less for many days, their ethical judgment goes, their sort of higher critical thinking goes, and that's why one of the reasons probably people do strange things when they're sleep deprived for a long time, residents, soldiers, etc. Well, I don't know how, I haven't really studied this or looked at it, but it's very common for the parents of the kids who have autism or other special needs that they're sleeping 6 hours or less a day for managing their lives and taking care of their kids and doing all these things. And if possible, when you can, remember that that our kids, our families depend on us, and we have to take care of ourselves in order to prolong our years on this green earth. So I was very emotional about coming here to see everybody, because I remember the day where I tried to track down the researcher in Italy who had published some papers on CACNA, and I think I bothered her during our honeymoon. But yeah, so I'm like, to see everybody here together is scary. It's humbling, and I want to thank you. I want to thank you for staying late and listening to me, and I wish everyone the best. Thank you.
Thank you so much. If you're okay with it, we have a couple questions maybe in the room, and we also have a few from our online participants. The first question is, you mentioned VNS having an impact on sleep apnea. Is it due to a particular component of the VNS setting, and are there recommendations to adjust differently for those at risk of worsening apnea?
Yeah, so with the VNS, there are different aspects of it that are set. So there's the current, there's on and off time, there's the pulse width of the vagus nerve stimulator, and it turns out if you go to higher utilization settings, so 7 seconds on, 12 seconds off, so the higher, and you're also using higher currents, you can actually precipitate sleep apnea because of its effect. Right, the vagus nerve is there, and because of its effect directly on the brainstem, as far as the nerves that go to the muscles that keep the airway open. So the reason I'm trying to avoid what exactly to do is because I'm trying to. That gets touchy from a clinical situation, because you don't want to. I don't want to give people advice and then provoke seizures. So I'm going to try to talk about it in general and say, please follow up with your physician about what would be a better setting. If you're worried about it, get a sleep study, and they can actually put a lead during the sleep study on the VNS to actually pick up what the. If you tune the EKG right, you can actually see the discharge on the EKG. I was giving Botox when I used Botox, I can hear it. I can hear the VNS. And you can see if the VNS discharges correlate with any apnea. And then they can also turn it off, of course, during the sleep study to see if that fixes things just even temporarily. But there are certain settings, there is some research, but it's certainly a clinical decision about what to do with that, because there are always, the only cheese that's free is in a mousetrap. Right? There's pluses and there are minuses. I can't,
Any questions in the room?
Oh, sorry. I'm used to doing that.
Have you ever used Prozac with central apnea?
No, not you personally.
Not yet. I've used other serotonergics for some patients who had brainstem insults of various types, hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy, to help to fix some of their sleep disorder breathing at night that was central and causing some very disruptive kind of gasping. So, the question, the SSRIs they actually reduce REM sleep as well. So there's this whole hypothesis, suspicion, about the role of serotonin in the brainstem, looking at, of course, SIDS and the serotonergic drivers of breathing, and so that's part of where that question that's where that question comes up. But in general, serotonergic medicines and others reduce REM sleep in general, and so that reduces, for some people, it reduces their sleep disorder breathing if it happens in REM. So, but there aren't really great studies that show using Prozac reduces sleep apnea in that sense.
Our next question is for non-REM parasomnias versus REM parasomnias. What treatments for other conditions are known to exacerbate their frequency, for example, non-REM, and or intensity? And do the non-REM disorders continue to get worse? If so, at what point?
Wow, that's a big question. Okay, so, but it gets at a good point, I think, at that difference between REM and non-REM. So a lot of the parasomnias I was talking about, almost all of them, are more specific to non-REM sleep. So non-REM sleep is an active body with sort of a zombie-ish brain, right? And not working exactly right. In REM sleep, you have an active brain dreaming in a paralyzed body. So, the most concerning, the most popular, I guess, of the REM-based parasomnias is something called the REM behavior disorder. And so the idea until a few years ago was that only people who can get Parkinson's get REM behavior disorder, and it's not true, and especially not in kids. I see it in kids. But the thing to watch for is what triggers the parasomnia. So if people are having those, they are scary and they are dramatic, and REM behavior disorder is its own unique phenomena, but the non-REM parasomnias, sleep talking, sleepwalking, night terrors, right? Those are what binds them all is you have a child who can be active, a person who can be active, in a brain that's confused, it's not acting right. So screaming, walking. In my house we had sorry, I keep doing that. I'm not sure which son it was, but for a while we had a ghost that would pee in a corner at night, and so that was where my son got confused and thought he was in the bathroom. Okay? And so, in general, so again, I'll say it again, the parasomnias, especially the non-REM ones, you have to ask why. So, and it could be eczema, it could be sleep apnea, it could be restless legs, it could be a lot of the primary problems, but they also tend to, over lifetime in adulthood, you see, in standard issue people, you see fewer of them, but you definitely see, and it doesn't mean necessarily, it doesn't indicate psychopathology.
Thank you. Any other questions from the room? Hands up.
Oh.
The question, CPAP versus BiPAP?
Yeah. Can you comment on CPAP and BiPAP? When do you recommend which one?
So in the PAP world, right, the positive airway pressure, so CPAP stands for continuous positive airway pressure, and BiPAP is two levels of pressure. So one that goes up when you breathe in, and then another level that's lower when you breathe out. And it is very idiosyncratic based on the needs of the patient and which one you use, age. BiPAP is, for a lot of people, BiPAP is sometimes more comfortable for people who are failing just CPAP. But CPAP itself has some settings that kind of act a little bit BiPAP-ish. There's sort of the mask will have a little pop-off release. So you breathe in at a certain level. When you breathe out, there's a pop-off. So it's kind of, the distinction is a little blurry, But the BiPAP machines also, they sense your breathing, and there are some that look at tidal volume, and some that look at that just trigger with your respiratory rate, some that have their own backup rate. So that's what I'm saying. It gets very confusing and very much depends on the individual needs of the person. So not everyone needs the machine to take over and trigger breaths for them. So that's a different kind of BiPAP machine. It's a little bit more complex. So I mean, they're both great. I mean, look, there was just something that came out in March. It was in the Green Journal, looking at adults and how positive airway pressure of any kind staves off dementia and cognitive impairment. I mean, if you have sleep apnea, it acts when you use positive airway pressure and you're successful. It's like another anticonvulsant as far as preventing seizures, right? Who's been told to be sleep deprived for an EEG, right, or your child, right? You got to sleep deprive your child before the EEG, right? The reason is your EEG gets uglier if you're even an hour sleep deprived. And so it took people a while to say, oh, well, maybe sleep disorders trigger more seizures. And they do. And so treating sleep apnea actually reduces seizure burden.
And one more question from our online community. This person writes, Dr. Chung mentioned GI issues were present from the natural history study. Do GI disorders in the CACNA1A community contribute to sleep dysfunction?
Of course. I'm just trying to think off the top of my head, and I can look at it later on the Facebook group as far as the GI symptoms. But in general, GI symptoms, anything that's pain-producing can disrupt sleep. And I talked even about eczema, but certainly reflux and constipation can disrupt sleep. Reflux, by the way, can irritate the vocal cords and irritate your upper airway. So it can physically cause, remember I talked about those three big variables, right? And one of them is the airway, right? So irritation of the upper airway can be the result of GI issues. So I don't think I'd be able to say that it's more prevalent in the CACNA1A family than in other kids with special needs. But again, it's one of these greater illness variables that really needs to be attended to.
Good question for quite some time here.
Okay. So my son does have sleep apnea, and we did trial the CPAP and the BiPAP machines, and he's also had seizures in his sleep, and he has such an antagonism towards the CPAP and BiPAP machines
It shows his good judgment.
that he actually went into seizure, kind of to avoid it, I guess, as you could say. And one of the warning signs I have when he does have a seizure in his sleep is his labor breathing. I listen to him on a monitor. And so so we stopped the BiPAP and the CPAP. I was also told that if one of those machines, if the power goes out, it could literally suffocate him. If your electricity or power in your area goes out.
Yeah. Well, that's sort of fear-mongering, I think. Look,
Okay.
You could see a situation where there's, ventilators could too, right? But if you need a ventilator, you need a ventilator.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. But so we weren't really able to successfully use either machine.
Oh, yeah.
In the Inspire.
Aspire.
Yeah, Aspire. That my doctor said you can't get until you're fully grown 22.
You
is
can't
there
get
any
it until you're.
22? I think.
No, it's not true.
No?
So absolutely not
So
true.
just
So
let me
there's
know
no the
if
ethics.
anything-
So that's a canard that insurance companies play to keep from paying for things. They're saying that it's experimental for kids. The AAP has tons of ethical statements, and they play this game with medicines too, where they say because it's investigational because it hasn't been approved for under 18. It's garbage. It's unethical. And I almost never lose when I go head-to-head with a reviewer of the same specialty. So I think you're. In fact, I have ENTs. I actually called Aspire and spoke to them about it, And yeah, I mean, they got it. They were hesitant at first, but when I kind of sent them the AAP ethics statement, they kind of, you know, and I trolled the CEO on LinkedIn. Sorry, I did. Because I had a patient who was going to die in his sleep if he didn't get it. So the other thing that you made me think about is because you know, in Houston I've flooded twice, so the concern about power is a good one. If kids can move around, I mean, they pull it off all the time. It's hard to breathe. It's annoying, but I don't think. I mean, that's a fear that I don't think has ever been reported, like the tubing, you know. So. Yes, it's obnoxious. Yes, it takes a long time to get used to it. But I mean, I tell everybody, if you're, you know, like, you know, in places where you're going to lose power, like you want to be first on. You call your utility company to make sure that if there's a power outage, you're the first on. I tell people to have batteries for a backup, right? And if it happens a lot, we just got a generator. And I know Medicaid, you know, when at least on MDCP, will pay for like a home upgrade or for things that have to do with the medical problems. At least on MDCP, they do a one-time contribution to that. So, you know, it's not a completely, it's certainly not an unreasonable thing to think about. But yeah, so I tell people to have a battery backup.
Is that on? Can you touch on, you touched on this, but can you better explain the relationship between CACNA1A and the circadian rhythm?
Oh. Yeah, I think so to explain it, start thinking about what caffeine does. So caffeine is an adenosine inhibitor, and as we're awake, there's a pressure to sleep that builds and builds and builds because our adenosine levels go up. The brain. So adenosine is it's another hormone of sleep. What are things that block adenosine? Well, caffeine, taking a nap. So you get rid of by going to sleep, you expend your adenosine levels. Okay, so take a nap or going to sleep. What happens is that there are G proteins, right, that govern. So G proteins are second messengers. There are other, like CBD works through a second messenger system. Some of the medicines we use they don't work directly on a channel. They work, you know, sneakily by changing the sensitivity and how channels turn on and turn off, and that's with G proteins are one of the main mechanisms of that, or the best known, I should say. And so, when what happens, adenosine interacts with these G proteins to turn off the CAV in general, the CAV 2.1 channel, to inhibit it. So it's kind of it's hard to conceptualize, and I was trying to rush to get to all the slides, but because it's almost like at times like a double negative, right? So if you have already calcium channels that are dysfunctional, like these mice, the point is the visual here. So these mice, in trying to understand what the levels of adenosine were, they were looking at the interaction between adenosine and the CAV 2.1. So they bred these mice that were knockout, and then they looked at how they responded to the usual circadian, okay, German word, Zeitgeibers, okay? I don't know how that translated. My hovercraft is full of eels. You'll have to tell me how that came out. But the mice didn't act normally. So when you knock out CAV 2.1, the mice did not sleep as deeply. They did not have normalized sleep, right? So the blue on the one on the right on those knockout mice never goes down enough compared to their standard issue friends. And so that made me think about what's going on. If 50% of our family reports restless sleep, right? Insomnia, intermittent insomnia is a common thing. There's got to be something. I think that's important. But that's all I have. I mean, you start with, so what I do with these things with the variants in general is I look on gene cards and I look at not just the medicines that interact with the channel, but does everyone know what gene cards is? Okay, if you have trouble being able to sleep too well, go to gene cards and look up CACNA1A, and you will get a encyclopedia, a bunny, not just a bunny hole, it's like a bunny world of detail on CACNA1A that you will never, it never ends. And one of the subheadings on there looks at the different functional parts of the body where CACNA1A is active, what are the processes, where is it expressed in the body, where is it expressed, so it's great. And one of the functions or one of the processes where it's linked is circadian rhythms. I mean, another one is insulin regulation, so it'd be interesting to talk to the adults at some point. It's another question. And that's what sort of provoked me to ask some of the questions on the Facebook group, the Facebook study, because I looked there and I said, well, maybe this is something that binds that no one's really talked about. Anyway, but this is sort of at least what we can say is probably the mechanism that probably has to do with adenosine and how it interacts with our CACNA. So if you're a gain of function, right, it may have the opposite effect versus someone who's a loss of function. So orally, it turns out, I think, is a loss of function. But if it's a gain of function, it may have too much of an effect. So those kids might be sleepier, right, or have very abnormal responses. So my guess is that there's probably two groups of sleep circadian rhythms based on the functionality of CACNA. But that's a total cocktail hour kind of hypothesis. I have no data to back that up.
No, but that would be an interesting study.
Sorry?
I think that would be an interesting study because
it wouldn't be expensive. The actographs are cheap.
But so many parents, state that their kids have sleep issues. Some of them sleep a lot and still could take a nap if they need to, like a hypersomnolence almost. And then others are up all night and they need drugs and melatonin to get to sleep. And it would be interesting to chart that and see their variance and whether, well, that's something that we could
now
do
that we have
through
a
the
better
natural history study too. So
well, now that we have a better idea of some gain of function versus loss,
right.
I mean, it's probably worth thinking about. And I'll just go back to that as far as the excessive daytime sleepiness, right? That's 40%.
This is not going to be interesting to anyone, and I apologize, and I should probably ask you later. But in talking about our natural history study, one of the things we wanted to do was ask more questions about sleep. So we were looking at the Children's Sleep Habits Questionnaire or the Sleep Disturbance Scale for children. So I'd love to talk to you about that at another time. Anyway.
Let the good times roll. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thanks for tolerating me.